How China is changing Hollywood. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. China's film market is booming. Box office revenues rose 30% last year to $2.7 billion. China is expected to overtake the US within a decade, with about 10 new screens opening daily. But China's not an easy market for foreign filmmakers. To protect and nurture its local industry, China only allows 34 foreign films to be shown annually. Films that offend China don't make the cut, so you're unlikely to see Batman or James Bond face off against Chinese villains in the future. But you are likely to see more of Shanghai's gleaming skyscrapers, more Chinese faces, and perhaps a few Chinese characters on the planet Pandora going forward. This week on Thoughtful China, we're talking with several experts about how China is changing the way Hollywood makes and markets films, and current trends shaping China's own film industry. Also, Serena Liu will have a thought or two about opportunities for local brands within Chinese and international films. But first, with us is Jeffrey Sung, CEO of Media Asia Group Holdings, a film production and distribution company behind films like Infernal Affairs. Jeffrey, welcome to Thoughtful China.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How would you describe the current state of China's film industry?
Obviously, it's a very exciting time. The business is growing as fast as ever, probably the fastest in human history. 30% a year is what statistics show us. And also the cinema constructions, 10 new screens per day. Last year, I think we've added more than 3,000 screens. Besides that, and I think what's of particular interest is that increasingly the cinemas are going to second-tier, third-tier cities and rural markets. So actually, every day there's a new crop of first-time cinema goers in China. I think this is also very interesting. Obviously, the Chinese audience have been exposed to Western cinema through internet or DVDs, but the cinema-going experience is new to a lot of new families and the new middle class, and we think this is a very exciting time to be working in China.
And they're also excited because of the new influx of content and films, whereas before there's been some talk and perhaps some criticism about a lot of major films being focused on period pieces or war dramas. It seems in past year or two, with hits like Lost in Thailand or American Dreams in China, there's more diversity. Do you see that as a trend?
Right. Besides more diversity, as you pointed out, there's also this newfound sense of self. We're finding that topics to be more Chinese in recent years, and we're finding topics that relate to people's everyday lives. Before it was an escapist experience when you go to a cinema, when you watch a big Hollywood blockbuster, or when you watch a big martial arts period historical drama piece in China. That doesn't really relate to your daily life, but we've seen films such as Lost in Thailand, as you said, American Dreams in China. These actually pertain to people's aspirations in their daily lives. So people are experimenting, Chinese filmmakers are experimenting with new topics that have never been done in Chinese cinema before.
Now, countries like Thailand have carved out certain niches. For example, star-driven action films with stars like Tony Jaa. Do you feel that China has an opportunity to also break into international markets in particular niches, or do you think that they're looking more to develop their domestic market primarily and worry about the international markets later?
Well, the holy grail has always been making a film that not only works in China, but also works internationally. But we have to understand the difference in the incentives. For Thailand, obviously there are a lot of great creators there. The domestic market is not big enough, so obviously going overseas, this export-driven mentality is very important for the survival of the business. But in China today, actually there's not as high an incentive because the domestic box office is actually big enough, strong enough to support a very healthy industry. So obviously the stars will still like to do Hollywood movies, but everything is incentive driven, right? So, and finding a topic that travels. I think that the West is gradually understanding more and more about China and becoming more and more interested about China. So as this social trend changes, I think Chinese films can probably travel better internationally.
Now, Media Asia is based in Hong Kong, but actually has a significant presence in China and has for quite some time. Perhaps some of our audience members actually aren't aware of the extent to which you've been involved in the Chinese film industry for many years. A lot of times there's discussion about Hong Kong creators versus Chinese creators, whether that's directors or writers or the creative talent driving the creative forces in the film industry here. How do you see the Hong Kong-China debate?
Media Asia is one of the oldest movie studios in Greater China. You know, we're headquartered in Hong Kong, we're listed in Hong Kong, but actually we have a unique advantage because we have a theatrical distribution license in China, so we're actually at an even playing field with all the major Chinese studios. And not only that, but we've also invested in China from the early days on, you know, from the early films of director Feng Xiaogang, for example, and some of the major blockbuster films like The Founding of the Republic and 1942, some of these major Chinese, people classify as pure Chinese movies. We're actually early investors and major investors in these films. So we've worked in China for many, many years. In terms of your question, regarding your question on the Hong Kong directors and Chinese directors, the way we look at it, obviously Hong Kong has a much longer history in terms of filmmaking, and the directors are very well crafted in what they do. We don't like to classify them as either Hong Kong directors or Chinese directors. For example, we've worked with Peter Chan for a long time. He's always done films that appeal to a wide audience. For example, American Dreams in China is one such example. So we think that, you know, the Hong Kong directors can direct movies with themes that are Chinese intrinsically, as long as they bring to the same level of the craft, as long as they're given a free hand to do what they're best at in terms of the creative elements of the film. And I think you know, certain common themes in a story of a movie can appeal to the Chinese audience as well as the Hong Kong audience.
Now, earlier this year, Media Asia Group co-founded Superhero, which is a new joint venture with Donnie Yen, and talk to us about that partnership.
Well, Donnie Yen to us is a superstar, and that's why the company is called Superhero Films. And we have a reputation of grooming and working with talent, and a very, how do I put it, a very hands-off approach, letting them do what they do best. To us, Donnie Yen is basically on the lines of Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li. He's an action superstar. So we started this company not so much as to manage Donnie as from a talent standpoint, even though we do have a very large talent pool, including Donnie. But we also believe in his abilities to produce films. So actually this company is going to, us, Media Asia, and Donnie is going to jointly produce films under the umbrella of Superhero Films.
Thanks, Jeffrey, for being on Thoughtful.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a break to hear from Serena Liu about opportunities for local brands within Chinese and international films. When we come back, we'll find out how Hollywood is catering to the Chinese market and how Chinese studios are finding a bigger audience overseas.
As Trevor mentioned earlier, China's film market is booming. Hollywood films already have enormous and growing influence on China's society and culture, and eventually on its consumers. So as a result, more and more brands here recognize that Hollywood films are the single most powerful entertainment vehicle there is to convey the brand's message to the consumers. So now the question is, how can brands catch a ride on this powerful, fast-moving vehicle? One option, obviously, is product placement. And we have already seen that in some major Hollywood films here, such as Transformers 3 and Iron Man 3. My own company, Filmmakers China, helped Yili establish a brand image for Shuhua Yili milk based on one line, which is smartly delivered in a very funny scene. Let's take a look.
I'm still stewing about that binder incident, Jerry.
May I finish my Shuhua milk, Donnie?
I don't care about your exotic milk. I care about respect.
But product placement only works if advertisers respect the integrity of these films and do not place too many demands on the filmmakers about the placement's details. If you do, your brands will be left on the cutting room floor all the effort will backfire, hurting the movie and your own brands. Also, if the placement is out of the context, moviegoers will find it very, very unwelcome, and there's nothing entertaining about that. So, and there are other options at cloud brands that choose tying promotional activities, where the brands use assets from films to amplify the brand messages, even if there's no placement in the films, such as Suning Eagle vs. Hunger Games and Master Kong vs. Superman and Man of Steel.
康师傅冰红茶携手超人钢铁之躯，给你纪念版金币、酷炫耳机、丰富好礼，宾利畅爽超级赢，多喝多赢。
One obvious advantage here is that you know the tune and image of the film properties when you make the decision, and therefore you can make the brand message more targeted and polished. Also, your waiting time is cutting down from 18 months to 6 months. Even then, choose your movie properties wisely. The film's message has to match your brand message. Lastly, there are doors no one has opened yet here. Brands in other more mature markets are now making their own films. So be brave, embrace the change, and have fun.
Thanks, Serena. We're back in our studio with Zhao Lai, Managing Director of Huayi Brothers Fashion Group, writer and film director Kenneth Bi, and entertainment lawyer Steven Saltzman, a partner at Loeb & Loeb. We're talking today about how China is changing Hollywood's approach to making and promoting films, but also opportunities for China's film industry overseas. Lei, Ken, Steve, thanks for being on Thoughtful China.
Nice to be here.
Yeah.
Now, there's actually a common thread today because Huayi Brothers has produced Control, Ken, your new film, and you're also one of the featured directors under the H Projects umbrella.
Project H.
Project H.
Okay.
That's right.
And Steve, you're one of the outside counsel that work closely with them. And Lei, of course, you're help leading their fashion and entertainment business.
Yeah.
So let's start with a general question. As a creator, how excited are you about China's film market today?
I'm very excited. I've been asked this question quite a lot actually recently, but and kind of formulated an answer, which is like, I think in the last 5 years, like the Chinese audience has really grown up to really vote, with their money, on what kind of films they want to see, which is really exciting. So there's no, they're not forced to watch certain kinds of films because people tell them to do it. They see whatever they want, and that's why you see like these very interesting market-driven films being very successful.
And not only in China, but also with, for example, the recent festival darling, Jia Zhangke's A Touch of Sin, causing a lot of buzz overseas. Do you see this as an opportunity for Chinese stars and films to start to really gain an audience overseas?
I really believe in back the first set of directors who are overseas, such like Zhang Yimou, all those directors, they actually bought the first, let's say, wave of Chinese movie. And then in between, everything went commercial in Chinese own style. But right now, again, I can see Chinese movie stars plus directors and plus good movies again coming on the second wave to overseas, which is great.
And I want to stay on one of your areas of specialty, of course, which is fashion and how the two worlds unite. And obviously we've seen in the past 5 to 10 years fashion brands and also Chinese supermodels gaining a stage internationally.
Right.
Do you feel like this is an opportunity now for fashion and entertainment to really be molded closer together?
I always think fashion and movies together. I mean, through all the movies yearly, you will see fashion brand in playing the movie, you will see movie star wearing the top fashion clothes, then you will see now a lot of supermodels whizzing inside the movies. So they're always related. I think right now is an opportunity to expand the type of business, not only stuck within the movie business, we can actually go much broader.
Across multiple platforms.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And so, Steve, this must mean a lot of interesting times for you in your important role.
Well, absolutely. In fact, just following up on what he was saying, I represent the actor Godfrey Gao, who many know as the first Asian male face of Louis Vuitton. And so I did his deal for Mortal Instruments, a big Sony franchise movie that will be coming out. And so now you have a situation where you have a supermodel that is now also appearing as an actor in films, having US representation, and hopefully an international career that takes off on the heels of Mortal Instruments.
And of course, Ken, you have a lot of experience with this now.
I have no experience with fashion.
Well, Daniel Wu, though, is one of those real success stories and,
right.
And a real superstar here as well, and he's the star of your upcoming film.
Right.
Talk to us about how important it is to have a marquee such as himself starring in your film for the mainland audience.
It's very important, but you know, as well as choosing like a marquee name, I'm always looking at the right actor for the film.
The talent.
Sure, the right actor for the role, and really, Daniel was the only person I wanted to work with on this film, and he was the only person I talked to for this film, and he turned out to be, you know, he turned out wanting to do this film very much. So, I think it's all a matter of timing, you know. Actually, we waited for a long time for him to finish his other movies and to do ours. But I think timing has a lot to do with it, who's available at the time, and who's right for the movie. Yeah. And
has it impressed you how quickly Hong Kong actors have picked up Mandarin, and in fact their skill level has improved over the past decade?
They have improved? No, they have. Yeah, I mean, I find myself, I spent the last 2 years, you know, coming to China a lot, and I found my Mandarin, my Putonghua, you know, getting much better. You know, I know a lot more swear words and how to yeah.
Well, I think also I think back to when I was watching some of my favorite actors like Trevor Lai, and when they used to do the voiceovers, and now the experience when you're actually seeing the actor speaking himself in his own voice, it is a very different experience.
That's right. I really believe in the market will decide for everything. I mean, look at the fashion industry. Back 5 years ago, there's no many Chinese supermodels, and 5 years today, I mean, on the top model list, there's 6, 7 supermodel from China. So is the same thing with movie stars, with Hollywood movie stars coming to China, with Hollywood movies like joint venture shooting in China. I think, I mean, it's really the market will change every single thing.
Do you think, when we talk about Hollywood, sometimes under the microscope of international audiences, they'll say, for the China version of Iron Man 3, for example, that perhaps the story is not as naturally integrated with the Chinese involvement as it could be? Do you think that this will improve with time?
Well, I think you can tell us more. But
yes, I think it will improve with time. I think we're seeing different phases. I mean, the first phase was obviously a lot of people rushing to do co-productions and to try to access the benefit of co-productions. But it was difficult, it was challenging. None of the co-productions, or very few, were actually successful in both the Chinese marketplace and outside of China. And then we saw what happened ultimately with Iron Man 3. And I think there are only so many projects that have an organic DNA that makes them suitable for co-productions. But what I think we're seeing more of now are projects that will add Chinese elements, whether it's Chinese talent, whether it's storylines, but add them more organically to provide greater commercial viability for these projects in China. So they won't be striving to qualify as co-productions, but they'll be adding elements that will make them more attractive to the Chinese box office.
Do you see a day when not only is that version limited to China though, but it's actually created so that the international audience can also enjoy it?
Yes, I think the trick is, in a way, I think that's the holy grail. That's what people are trying to achieve now. There's a lot of experimentation, obviously. There's a learning curve. But eventually, yes, I think there will be projects that will be successful on a completely global basis, both within the Chinese marketplace and outside. And they will have storylines and casting that will be completely organic and appreciated by that global audience. And so I see that coming. I think we have writers, directors such as Kenny, talent elements that are changing. We've just talked about that, that will lead to projects that will have all of these disparate elements coming together.
Now, Ken, obviously as a writer and a director, obviously the story comes first, and that's the source of your inspiration.
Yeah.
But at the same time, tell us about how much you do think about the mainland audience when you're creating.
Well, this last film that I'm doing, Control, is my first co-production with China, and my previous films were, kind of limited to Hong Kong or the rest of the world. Limited to the rest of the world. It sounds like I'm bragging, but there were elements that were not suitable for mainland China release. So I really wanted to attempt to engage the mainland Chinese audience as a challenge for myself, and actually to learn more about China. I find that a lot of Hong Kong directors, in Hong Kong, we don't know too much about China. We know the big stuff, but having to spend the last 2 years working in China, I found I really knew very little about China and Chinese people. And for me, it's very encouraging, and I really encourage all the other Hong Kong directors to explore China, because it's such a huge country.
And so rich.
And so rich in history, and so many interesting people, so many interesting stories. I think, yeah, that needs to be explored. I'm humbled by this experience, yeah.
Leah, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how there's sometimes discussion how, although we have a few superstars in the fashion world who have made the leap overseas, there's also a lot of talk domestically that the fashion industry within China perhaps is not big enough to sustain pure fashion models, for example.
Put this way, the Chinese fashion industry has been trying very hard to create their own image. But the biggest problem is most of the designers are really only still stuck in their own cage. They have no idea yet how to make everybody happy. So also they don't know how to, like French, to really build up a fashion story. I think fashion it's a great story. It's like a movie too. So Chinese still learning how to build a story, right? So as you're saying, if there's a model go overseas because it's recognized by the international fashion designers or fashion industry, but then the local designers probably still try to pick their own look for the local audience and local customers. So I think still a long way to go, honestly.
Steve, let's switch gears for a second. Can we talk a little bit about some of the key regulations that foreign filmmakers or foreign production houses really need to be aware of when they think about co-productions in China?
Well, obviously one of the first things, if you're talking about co-production, you have rules and regulations that you have to comply with, a lot of which are promulgated on the CFCC website. And a lot of that is challenging to comply with if you're going to qualify for a Sino co-production. You need 1/3 of your lead cast to be Chinese nationals, for example. You're going to need a Chinese co-production partner. There's going to be a certain amount that has to be produced here. And you're going to need SARFT approval of both the screenplay and the finished film. So you're going to need to qualify on all of those levels. I think that's what people also don't necessarily realize. While a lot of people talk about the quota, for example, that was increased to 34 last year, and also the fixed minimum guarantee deals for those films that can come in, so additionally another 35 or 40 films, let's say, you still have the co-production scenario, which affords you all these benefits, but it's hard to thread that needle. So it's a challenging prospect to do that co-production, but even for local productions, they have to be cognizant of SARFT censorship. And I'm involved in a production right now where there was a preliminary approval of the screenplay, but at the last minute, while the project is in deep pre-production, there have been further changes being sought by SARFT. And so that's something that you have to build in a way, which is that flexibility and being able to deal with the censorship approvals as and when they arise.
And do you think, as part of those challenges, the big Hollywood players are also learning how to work around things such as locally, sometimes they schedule the same genre, big blockbusters on the same date to kind of, you know, again, create some more competitive issues.
Well, that's a different issue. That's the distribution issue. That's not so much the production side, but the release side. And that's not so much a regulatory issue as a commercial issue, and how much the government actually wants to see foreign films dominating the local box office.
But it's also an extension of that process that you're talking about, where if you have the foresight, as you're even in pre-production, you're running into hurdles, that once you think you've passed that stage, actually there's another barrier perhaps waiting for you down the line.
That's a commercial barrier. You could be coming in at the wrong time. There could be a blackout period, or there could be the situation that there is a certain amount of intervention in terms of evening out that box office. People talk about the percentages. Some say that the desired percentage would be roughly 50-50. In other words, 50% of the box office being local successful films and 50% being either co-productions or foreign imports. I think we saw last year it was roughly around there, maybe 60-40 weighted to the foreign side. And so maybe 60-40 is okay. But I think at the end of the day, whatever that percentage is, there is a certain acknowledged gearing of that that has to be taken into account. And whether that's as a licensor or whether that's as a producer, you may run up against that gearing of the box office. And we'll have to see how that plays out. People talk about the Chinese box office being on par with the US box office, depending on the numbers you hear, 2017, 2018, 2019, but it doesn't matter. At some point, it will be the same size as the US. And it's going to be very interesting to see what the mix will be of the films that will be that $10 billion box office.
And it'll also be interesting to see if China follows and overtakes the US in terms of product placement and marketing and co-branding. I mean, we've seen the headlines with Man of Steel recouping $170 million US of its budget just through sponsorships. Over 100 deals, I think, or nearly 100 deals, which is a record from what I've heard. Is this something that again, is exciting or interesting, or does it come on your radar as a creator?
As a director, yeah, you're asking the wrong person. But this is a good question to ask, especially to a director. I used to be really resistant to the idea of product placement, especially the type of films I was making. You know, like more personal. It's very strange to have a product suddenly show up, but. As I steered more and more towards market-driven films, I don't worry about it anymore, and I find it helpful. You know, we need products in the film, and you know, why not have beneficial partnerships?
Especially if the stories are based in real life, like fashion brands, for example, are a part of the everyday Chinese consumer's life. It makes sense for brands.
I still think, I mean, a lot to do with directors. Some director has a better skill to make the whole scenery mix nicely.
Yes.
But then you see some film so bluntly on your face.
So blatant.
Yeah. It actually takes the audience out of the film.
Yeah. And a lot of audience would laugh.
Yes.
You know?
I know,
Right,
I know.
I've seen it happen.
Recently I've seen a few films, I don't want to say names, but it's like everybody was saying, it's not a film, it's advertising.
Right.
But you see film inside advertising. It's totally different.
And how do you see in a few years, we talk about looking forward at the industry, and aside from numbers, from terms of creative leadership or cultural leadership, China's role on the global cinematic stage?
Well, for me, I think I'm very excited because as China takes a very important place in the world, on the world stage, then people around the world would be more interested in Chinese content. They would be more interested in Chinese, royalties, or like our kings and queens, our emperors, and all our history and all our cultural elements. When people are not interested in the country, it's very hard for them to be interested in their films. So it happened in Hong Kong during the 80s, 70s and 80s, when Hong Kong was a focal point in Asia. People were interested in our stories, like gangsters or whatever. And when the economy went down, the interest went away as well. But China is going up, and as it takes its place in the world, more and more people will be interested in our content.
Steve, Ken, Lei, thanks for being on Thoughtful China.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Tudo and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter and join our LinkedIn group. We'll see you again.